Then let me just super quickly review this and go where we were last time. I mentioned that God is a God of love and He's a God of justice. Man, male and female, all of us, created on the first page of the Bible, we were created in His image. We have physical life, we have emotional life, and we have a spirit. We have the capacity to know God. We chose to sin, and immediately Adam and Eve sinned, and the whole race has come under God's justice, and we find ourselves spiritually dead. These arrows represented things people try to do to reach back to God. They don't work. They really don't work, because they don't deal with the real issue, which is sin. But God, in amazing love, provided a Savior, His only Son, who died in my place and in your place. The wages of sin is death, Romans 6 says. We earn something with our sin, death. And Jesus Christ, the sinless one, who had no sin, never thought sin, never committed sin, His mouth knew no deceit, He never put a twist on His words, like you and I are able to do in a deceitful way. The spotless Lamb of God died because my sin and your sin was placed on Him. And because of that, and I pointed this out, this is kind of the centerpiece. The diagram might have some weaknesses. I mean, you can't reduce God to a blackboard. But one thing I like about it is that the centerpiece is Christ and what He did. And when a person realizes what Jesus Christ did, who He is and what He did, and puts their faith in Christ, they are born again, born spiritually. And I came over here and just erased that messed up spirit that sin had defiled and put Christ there in our hearts. He comes and lives within us, and we pass from death to life. And so that's just a very brief review of this. And unless you stop me, and even if you try to stop me, maybe I won't stop. Now, if you have any questions there before I move on, I'm going to erase it, because this is a foundation for everything else we're going to be talking about in Essential Christianity. And so we'll come back to this, but I want to move on. So last week, Dr. Ott spoke of the triunity of God, that He is one God and has always existed in three persons. And if you've got that sheet now, that was point number 1 on this sheet. But tonight what I want to do is take up the second point. So if you look at it, we believe the person of Jesus Christ is both true God and true man. His death on the cross was sacrificial and substitutionary. His resurrection from among the dead was literal. And it moves on. It's a fairly long paragraph. But what I want to do tonight is talk about the person and the work of Jesus Christ. I often explain to people that Christ is Christianity. Christianity isn't a system of ethics or a philosophy or even a religion, the way men think of religions. Christianity is all about Jesus Christ. And so tonight we're talking essential when we're talking about the person and work of Jesus Christ. And when you say, Scott, what do you mean by person and work? That's my nomenclature. It's not mine uniquely. But I like that term because it speaks His person of the question of who is He? And His work asks what? His person, who is He? And then because of who He is, what has he done for me? And when you stop and think about it, that's a mouthful, first of all. I mean, you're saying a lot when you ask those two questions. And then it is the essence of Christianity. Who is Jesus Christ, and what did he do? And so let's start by just looking, and actually you look at that long paragraph, it divides that way. The first sentence, we believe the person of Jesus Christ is both true God and true man. The rest of the paragraph is his work. So we won't finish this tonight. I'm confident of that because there's so much here. We want to take a good look at Jesus Christ. And so let's take the first sentence first. We believe the person of Jesus Christ is both true God and true man. We're talking about his deity and his humanity. He is truly God and truly man. Not some sort of Superman. Oh, he's about half God, half man. No, we're not talking about, we're talking about one who is really God, truly God, and one who is truly man, minus the sin. Man, the way man was meant to be. He is true God and true man. Turn in your Bible, if you brought one, turn to John chapter 1. John 1. If you're new to the Bible, I might have mentioned this, but it doesn't hurt to mention it again because whenever you're learning something new and, you see nomenclature and stuff that doesn't make sense, whenever you see a reference like, well, I'll use this one, John chapter 1, verse 1, that means just that, 1:1. If I said 7:28, it'd be chapter 7, verse 28. And you can find your way around much more quickly that way. The numbers were placed in there by men. God didn't write it with numbers, but I'm glad we put them in there because I can tell you where to turn. You can get right there. But the four Gospels, there are four biographies, if you will, of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. God gave us four different views of his son. And no two of them are identical. They all harmonize, and they all speak of this perfect man. But each one has their own emphasis. Matthew speaks of him as the King of the Jews, and he was writing to a Jewish audience. Mark, written to the Romans, speaks of him as a servant, doesn't have any genealogy or anything like that, just gets right to his action. Luke speaks of his humanity. We've been enjoying Luke in the morning services here for some time because it tells us of the Son of Man, the perfect man, and it's a beautiful expression of his humanity. John speaks of his deity. So as you get to the very first verse, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Glance down to verse 14. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This, in essence, is the Christmas story in John. John doesn't give the details that Luke does about the baby and the manger and all that. He just says, from all eternity, there was this one called the Logos, the Word. He was with God, and he was God. And the Logos, the Word, verse 14, became flesh and dwelt among us. By the way, I would just, I give you verse 14, but I would put it like this. If you want a passage to really look at Jesus, it's called the Prologue of John. John didn't use much vocabulary. He wrote very simple. I think he used 500 vocabulary words in the whole book of John. It's very simple. If you ever try to learn Greek, why, that's the book they start you in, because there's not a whole lot of vocabulary there. And yet he says the most profound things. And so when you read it in English, it's my favorite book to hand someone to read, because John gets right to the essence of things. And so you'll see we're in John a lot as we're looking at essential Christianity. But that's and another thought I'd give you, that's the first chapter of John. Many times the first chapter of a book will really zero in on the person and work of Jesus Christ, because the person and work of Christ is the essence of Christianity. Well, God became man. And throughout John, he'll stay with that theme, and he makes these great statements. He says things that I think I said when I was introducing this series, that he made inescapable claims. And yet, most people in Portland are busy trying to escape, or unavoidable claims. And most people in Portland are trying to avoid his claims. And maybe you have really never looked at his claims. I mean, he said things that no one else has ever said. He said, I am the bread of life. If you eat of that stuff, you'll get hungry again. But if you eat of me, you'll never hunger. He said, I am the light of the world. He said, in a graveyard, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. He made a lot of these statements around this statement, I am. He ended up saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you're wanting to read, and I'm assuming you would like to because you're here looking at essentials, I would just encourage you to read the Gospel of John and watch for that statement. But he said things like no one ever said. It's one thing to say, like Buddha said, I'm the enlightened one. That's what Buddha means, the enlightened one. Jesus didn't say that. He said, I am the light. In fact, sometimes he would just say, I am. Ego, eimi. We get our word ego, people that are all about themselves. You can see where we get some of our verbiage. In Greek, he said, I am. Ego, eimi, the verb to be. I am. And sometimes that's all he said. In fact, we were looking at Judas in the morning service, Judas Iscariot, and how he betrayed the Lord for 30 pieces of silver. And you remember when he came, he brought 600 men to arrest Jesus. They came out with torches and lanterns and swords and clubs, and they were going to arrest him. And in John 18, he said, who are you looking for? And they said, Jesus, the Nazarene. And he said, ego eimi. And they fell over backwards when he just said, I am. Turn to John 8. Look at John 8. Jesus was facing a lot of adversarial debate, and the religionists were the ones that gave him the most heat. And so, he made amazing claims. We could go through this whole chapter with real value, but let me pick it up at verse 46. He said something that I would never say. I wouldn't say it among friends, let alone against, saying in a setting where people were my adversaries. But Jesus is in a back and forth with the religious leaders. And in verse 46, he says, which one of you convicts me of sin? If I speak truth, why do you not believe me? He said, which one of you can convict me of sin? Now, I'd never say that, especially if my wife was in the room. You know, but I would never say that here because you guys, it'd be easy to convict me of sin. But Jesus could say that sort of thing. Which one of you convicts me of sin? He's the sinless one. Nobody could bring a charge against him, and yet they did. They ponied up these false charges. But he said, which one of you convicts me of sin? He who is of God hears the words of God. For this reason you do not hear them, because you are not of God. The Jews answered and said to him, now listen to what they say when he says, which one of you convicts me of sin? They said, do we not say rightly that you're a Samaritan and have a demon? Now to them, a Samaritan was a half-breed, and it was kind of like the N-word. I mean, we call you, and so they resorted to that. They called him a Samaritan. Now, he wasn't a Samaritan, but he doesn't even dignify their accusation with a response. Don't we rightly call you a Samaritan and you have a demon? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. But I do not seek my glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. Well, there's another claim that's unlike any man that ever lived. If you'll keep my word, he said, you'll never see death. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, and the prophets also, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste of death. You can see how upset they were. How can you say that? Everybody dies. How can you say that someone who keeps your word won't die? Surely you're not greater than our father Abraham, who died. The prophets died too. Whom do you make yourself out to be, God? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. And you have not come to know him, but I know him. And if I say that I do not know him, I will be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Now, you know, Abraham, if you're not familiar with the Bible, I like to think in terms of a timeline. If this is where we are now, 2015, why 2,000 years ago, roughly, Jesus Christ lived. We date our calendars by him, BC, before Christ, and in the year of our Lord. And Abraham, you know, roughly 2,000 years BC. Jesus is speaking right here, and he said, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. The Jews therefore said to him, you're not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am. Ego eimi. He didn't say what I'd expect him to say. Before Abraham was born, I was. He said, I am. Now, these are Jews. These aren't people from Portland. You know what I mean? We might say, oh, that's cool. He said, I am. But they didn't. They knew what he was saying. When Moses met God out in the wilderness at the burning bush, and he said, take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. When Moses said, what's your name? Remember what he said? I am that I am. God's very name is the self-existent one. I am. When Jesus said, before Abraham was born, a couple thousand years ago, I am, they knew exactly what he was claiming. And as I said, they were Orthodox Jews. They took this seriously. They knew that this, what he was saying, was blasphemy if it's not true. And they had a choice. They could either fall down and worship him as God, he was claiming to be God, or they must kill him. It's blasphemous to say that. And they made their choice. Notice, therefore they picked up stones to throw at him. Jesus' claims are unavoidable, they're inescapable, and they're the same today in 2015 as they were then. I find that people often haven't really thought that through. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've tried to say, and I often ask people, what do you think of Christ? Because I want to know. I'm not curious about what you think of this church or that church or some religion. Who is Jesus to you? What do you think of this man, Jesus? He claimed to be God. Now, I was asked, I took quite a bit of philosophy at Portland State, not because I enjoyed it or because I was necessarily all that philosophical. I took it because it was easy. I mean, you could get a lot of hours of your general ed requirements pretty easy. You just had to get over the depression of sitting in the class. So I skipped a lot of philosophy classes too, true confession. You could still pass the test because there was so little said, really. But I had had quite a bit of philosophy, and I was asked to come in later and speak in a philosophy of religion class. I had actually got into it in the philosophy classes because, you know, it was interesting and a good opportunity. So I'd spoken in several of the philosophy classes. But I was asked to come into this philosophy of religion class. And this was after I had become a pastor. And they asked me to come and speak on Christianity. And then they were going to have a rabbi in to speak on Judaism and an imam in to speak on, you know, Islam. And so they gave me 50 minutes and a blackboard, and it was, you know, a fairly good-sized class, and the professor is sitting over here, and I'm supposed to present Christianity in 50 minutes. I'm thinking, boy, what do you do? Well, I did what I think I would still do if I were asked today. We're talking essential Christianity. I want to talk about the person and work of Jesus. So I said to the class, Christianity is Christ. And Christ made amazing claims. And I quoted some of the claims I've just shown you in the Bible. I didn't have the Bible. I had the Bible, but I didn't have them look it up. They didn't have a Bible. And, you know, you're in a classroom, a secular philosophy class, philosophy of religion. I said, and I wrote one of those claims down. In fact, I wrote John 14, verse 6 down, where Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. I didn't just write the numbers. I wrote the quote on the blackboard. And then I quoted several others, and I said, Jesus claimed to be God. And I established that. And he did. Then I said, now, given that claim, you could, and I came over here, and I had a whole blackboard to work with, so I'll give myself some room. And I said, given that he claimed to be God, I mean, he said that he created Mount Hood. And I challenge you tonight with that thought. He claimed to be God. Okay. He could have been a liar. Now that sat well with the philosophy class. Yeah, okay, could have been a liar. I mean, there's been a lot of religious liars. There's men that find they can make money lying about religion. It's throughout history there have been liars. So I said he could have been a liar. He could have been a lunatic. What I mean by that is, he actually thought he was God. He wasn't, of course, but he thought he was. Now that is one mixed up person. If I told you tonight I created Mount Hood, you would say, who invited me to this church? You know? And you would rightfully decide, I'll stick it out, and it's about 10 more minutes, and then I'm out of here. And it's sad to think of someone that mixed up. Actually thought he was God. He's not, of course, but he thought he was. I've met people like that. Maybe you have too. It's sad. You go downtown, and it's very sad to see someone that deranged to think those kind of things. But he could have been that. And again, in a philosophy class at PSU, okay. Could have been a liar, could have been a lunatic, could have been a legend. He didn't really say those things. He just kind of made, people got carried away and said that he said those things. And this is, you hear a lot of this today because, you know, you turn on PBS around Easter time and they'll have some special on getting back to the real Jesus, what he really said. And they'll spend a lot of time basically telling you that what we believe about Jesus Christ is kind of a legend. It's a myth that built up over centuries, and, you know, we'll get back to the real historical Jesus of Nazareth. So he could have been a legend. And, you know, again, that's a legitimate response. Given that he said that he was God, he could have been lying just in it for himself. And a lunatic, crazy, thought he was God. If I told you I created those trees out the window, you know, or he could have been a legend. He didn't really say those things. Then I said to the philosophy class, I don't think there's any other answers, legitimate answers. And I said, do you have any? Well, now remember, these are, you know, philosophy students. And I say to you tonight, is there any other answers? Well, the class was silent. And I said, no, come on, you must have some answer. I mean, I don't think there are any answers. I challenged them. But I asked, do you have any responses to that issue? Who is Jesus? Well, the professor's over here, you know, he's not going to sit still for some Christian coming into his class talking about, you know, and silencing his students. So he said, well, he was a teacher. And I said, no, it doesn't start with L. And the class kind of laughed. He didn't. I said, well, yeah, he was a teacher, but he taught that he was God. He was either a lying teacher or a crazy teacher, or he's much more than a teacher. He's God. He's a prophet. Well, yeah, he was a prophet. I mean, no question about it, he was a prophet. But again, he claimed so much more than that. He claimed to be God. If he was just a prophet, then he was a lying prophet, a false prophet, or a crazy prophet, or a prophet that they got all this stuff built up about. It's really an illegitimate, but so many people, maybe you tonight, you've said, well, he's a teacher, he's a religious founder. Well, of course he was. But that's not adequate. He claimed to be God. What have you answered regarding that? I challenged the class. I said, I don't think there are any other answers. And they were silent. And the professor wasn't happy, but he was silent. And I said, there's only one other answer, I believe. But I said, first, let me just say, if you want to say he's a liar, that's a legitimate response to his claims. You can say he was lying. I personally can't go there. He spoke like no man ever spoke. He was the perfection of ethics and morality. I can't write him off as a religious liar of that magnitude. Personally, you can if you want to. That's a legitimate response to his claims. Oh, he's a liar. I can't go there. You know, I got mad. No, I can't go there. And, you know, I can't go there. The front row saw the chalk broke. The rest of you back there wondered they're laughing about. Lunatic. You know, I can't go there either. He was the most balanced man that ever lived. No man ever spoke like he spoke. He went about doing good. I can't write him off as I'd have to write him off as completely deranged if he isn't really God, to claim to be God. I can't do that. You can if you want to, and it's a legitimate response to his claims. You're not just brushing him aside. You're saying, yeah, I know he claimed that, but I think he was crazy. If you want to go there, you can. It's at least a legitimate response. But me personally, I can't go there. And as to legend, you know, legends don't develop the way Jesus' story developed. I really can't see him as a legend either. Legends take a long time to develop. I still remember, I'm dating myself, but I remember where I was, and some of you do too, when President Kennedy was assassinated. I was in the lunch line, and we were yucking it up in the lunch line in 5th grade, waiting to get our food, and it was announced that the president had been shot, and there was silence. And we just didn't know what to think. The president, young, vital Jack Kennedy, you know, John F. Kennedy, killed. And we were quiet for just a while, and then the toughest guy in the class, you know, he'd flunked a class, he was the biggest guy, and he wasn't going to just be quiet for too long. He started yucking it up again. And I never forgot what happened. My math teacher, about 6'4", I've never seen him do this, he grabbed him by the scuff of the neck, and he yanked him out of the line, and he slammed him over here, and he said, "Shut up! The president's been shot." And every 5th grader and 6th grader and every other kid realized the president's been shot. Shut up. And for the next 2 or 3 days, some of you lived through it, you remember that old black and white TV, and Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald, and the whole scenario developed. And we tried as a nation to make a legend of John Kennedy. All of a sudden, the whole world changed. Cape Canaveral, down in Florida. We were in the middle of the space race. Cape Canaveral became Cape Kennedy. New York's airport, Kennedy International Airport. Every magazine article, every radio, every television, all about President Kennedy. We made a myth of John Kennedy overnight. But you know what? It didn't last. You know why? Too many people knew John Kennedy. Too many women knew Jack Kennedy. You see, legends take a long time to develop. You've got to get distance from the person. And you know, it just doesn't work for me to call Jesus Christ a legend. He said he'd die and rise again, and he did. And 40 days later, after he ascended to heaven, 10 more days, 50 days after his death, Peter stood up, and in Jerusalem, thousands of people. Peter pointed at his tomb. "It's empty," he said. He rose. And Christianity exploded right in the very city where he'd been crucified. And I told the class a little bit more as to why I couldn't believe he's a legend. I said, there's one other option. I can't go here. You can if you want. I can't go here. I can't go here. He could have been Lord, who he said he was. And that's where I land. He claimed to be God. He is God. What have you done with Jesus Christ? Well, he's a great teacher, Scott. We've gone over that, though. A lot of people haven't thought very far on this. He taught that he was God. It's not great teaching if it's not true. And if it's true, I should worship him. He said things that really force us into the same dilemma they were in John 8. You either worship him as Lord, or you must write him off as some sort of a charlatan, or a crazy man, or he never really existed. I mean, he's just, they've made stuff up about him. And you just kind of have to close your eyes to history and go back and reinvent it. And a lot of people do that. You're free to do that if you want to. But I say, please don't. No, Jesus Christ is who he said he was. He said, they're going to crucify me. They're going to spit on me and scourge me and mock me. And in 3 days, I will rise again. And he did. And his resurrection, God furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead. And today, where are we on this? 2,000 years later, millions of people know him personally and worship him. I'm among them. And I hope you are. But if you haven't put your faith in him, I will tell you, you'll never regret it. And this becomes the basis for everything else. You'll never really understand his work, what he did on the cross, until you understand who he is. Jesus Christ is who he claimed to be. He is the Lord of glory. He is and always has been God. The Word was with God. The Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. This is the essence of Christianity.